Despite Wood Elves having some of the best foot archers in the game in the form of Deepwood Scouts, Waywatchers, and Glade Guards, they are far from being the most valuable unit on the Wood Elf roster. Instead, Glade Riders takes the spot. Now at first glance, they don't seem to have anything special other than having the best range among skirmishing cavalry. Their speed and missile damage are similar to the typical horse archers. Their melee stats and leadership are decent, nothing too amazing. They are a jack-of-all-trade unit that can fulfill multiple roles on the battlefield, but far from being the best at any of them. Still, nothing can replace the Glade Riders in the Wood Elf army simply because of this versatility. First of all, they are a solid skirmisher, possibly the best among Wood Elves. Yes, they lack the raw damage output of Waywatchers, but their swift elven steed, providing them with excellent maneuverability on the battlefield, compensated damage with survivability. Normally, opponents of Wood Elves would spam mobility, hounds, bats, heavy and light cavalry, putting a heavy burden on other units to protect the foot archers. But Glade Riders don't need this kind of babysitting. Being one of the fastest ground unit, their superior speed and their access to poison in the form of hackbane tips, they will always be ahead of their enemies slowed down by poison. They also have the best range among all skirmishing cavalry, even better than some missile infantry. That means they can outshoot everyone else, easily countering skirmishing cavalry from other factions. The accuracy of bow and arrows allow them to snipe aerial units as well. With decent missile damage, even dragons who are heavily armored will accumulate noticeable damage over time. As skirmishers, they are nearly untouchable. Enemies who dare to give chase will simply get worn down by volleys of arrows, some even riddled with poison. Hounds, bats, heavy knights, other skirmish cavalry doesn't matter, they will get kited to death. But what really makes them stand out is their melee power. Despite being skirmishers, they are a unit that you expect them to hold decently in melee. Not only are their stats good enough to beat your typical missile infantry, but more importantly, they can do some reasonable damage and even rout off melee infantry if they can get a nice rear charge. That might be all the difference between a stalemate and a crumbling enemy. They also have good leadership that will keep them in fights instead of routing from the first few seconds of melee combat. That means you can even charge them into other cavalry, characters, or even monsters to bail out your other units in a pinch. After all, Glade Riders are cavalry with proper horses. They have enough mass to pin down even monstrous units, buying valuable time for other units to escape or reposition for a counter-attack. Combined with their kiting capabilities, they always have control in their own engagements. With their speed, they can always catch what they can fight, or at least get into range and whittle them with arrow fire. And if they can't fight them, they can always kite them to death. Now for a little conclusion, the Glade Riders are in no way the strongest unit on the Wood Elf roster. Wood Elves have other units that outperform them in many specific scenarios. Yet, in my opinion, they are, to simply put, the best. By simply bringing a couple of Glade Riders to the battlefield, you will be opened up to so many more tactical options. In a neat package of 700 gold or 825 if you bring hackbane tips, you are gaining access to a skirmisher that can survive on their own, an offensive light cavalry that can crush your opponent's missile units, and even front line if you have some nicely placed hammer and anvils, or an emergency bodyguard to plug up the gaps in your formations and stem the tide of defeat. If the Wild Riders are a hammer to crush enemies with their devastating charge, and Waywatchers are drills that punch holes on enemy formations with their precision fire, then Glade Riders are a Swiss knife that tightens loose screws when the front line buckles, or pull out a sharp blade when the situation demands, adding that slightest edge your army needs to cut through your enemies. Glade Riders can't compete with other specialized units in their expertise, but if those specialized units are otherwise occupied or absent, Glade Riders will be able to fill in the gap and get the job done. Their existence on the Wood Elf roster adds so much flexibility to Wood Elf armies in a way that no other Wood Elf units can replace, making them an excellent choice in almost all army matchups.